So now we've got physical slash physiological factors that you have to consider, and it's more to do with yourself and to do with the opponent as well. Okay. And I put physical slash physiological because just not to confuse people too much, and it's much more detailed that I could get into. Mm-hmm. It's actually quite simple. So physical stuff like number of opponents, you know, it's super risky to try to mitigate a large group of individuals. It's very risky. It's so hard to deal with. To deal with 2 individuals, it's very hard. You know, to deal with more than 2, it's nearly impossible, unless everything else that we're gonna mention in this video is top notch. You know, so also physical stuff that you have to consider is weapons. Everything changes when person pulls the knife out, or a gun, or a bat, or they've got a bottle. That's why the mental factor of light objects, it's one of the priorities to me. So let's say my friend got stabbed a few months ago, and he was at work, and he's a huge guy, and he took a person out of the venue, and it was like a high-end restaurant, and he got stabbed. He wasn't expecting it. It came as a punch to the stomach. He found it a bit weird, but then 30 seconds later he realized he was bleeding heavily from the stomach. And he's very well-trained athlete, martial artist, and he's just, I think he was, one of the reasons was he was a bit too comfortable. He wasn't expecting that. And I'm not saying you have to walk around thinking about it, someone's gonna stab you, but if there was any kind of threat, you always have to consider that the person that's angry at you has something with them, especially if they have their hands in the pockets. I always would keep, you know, extra distance, yeah. Even things like pepper spray were very popular back in my home country.
Yeah, I've got that in my eyes once.
Yeah, so that's hard to deal with, and they use it for different purposes. So clothing as well, it can work for your advantage as well as disadvantage. I got robbed a few times back home using the tactics that is only available when you wear a thick jacket when it's super cold. So I was, I don't know, 14, 15, I was with my friend, and 2 guys, they jumped on my back. They ran, I didn't even, you know, I was a kid, I was quite naive. I didn't even think it was middle of the day, loads of cars, people walking around. So they jumped on my back and they pulled my thick winter jacket over my head. Oh. So my hands were incapacitated, and he was sitting on my back. So I couldn't get up. I couldn't push myself off the floor. At first I thought it was my friend that was messing about with me. But a few kicks later, I realized he wasn't my friend at all. And I've got my phone taken and my wallet and everything else. Like we mentioned before in the previous video discussing environmental factors, if it's hot, usually people wear less clothing and they're sweaty. That impairs greatly how you can deal with the person because of how slippery it is. It depends what you're wearing, because if it's winter, again, not only you feel restricted by the cold, you might be actually quite warm underneath your jacket, but your jacket might be impairing your movement, or it can be used to perform any kind of action that's like not trained in typical martial arts, and you can't train in MMA, or, you know, I don't know, it used to be called dirty moves and stuff, but it's just street fighting. So grabbing becomes easier. Just control in general, the movement's restricted. Yeah, so mainly the issues with the movement, and you can use it against the person, or it can be used against you. Like hoodies.
Right.
I got beat up at school once by bigger guys, and I was wearing a hoodie, so they pulled it down my face, so my vision was restricted.
You're smart.
Yeah, it's effective.
Right.
It's effective. I've got a couple of friends that they've been beat up a few times like this as well, just with a hat. They just normal hat, they just pull it in the face. You can't really see anything, so all you're worried about at that point is taking it off, because you want to see what's going on. Therefore, it really helps if you know the environment you're at. If that happens, you know, in the area that you're familiar with, so you might not be able to see clearly, but you might know that if you start running, you're not going to end up knocked out, you know, knocking yourself out, you know, because of the post or whatever. You know, if you're in the street, you're not going to get hit, or you can at least make some kind of movement while you can't see. I'm not saying it's clever in any way, but if you know the area, you can at least resist a tiny bit. So that's why important. I think clothing, shoes, heavy shoes, you know, it comes with other environmental factors like how slippery it is, and so on, how well you're able to move. So when it comes to physiological factors, I put vision as one of my main priorities, because if you can't see an opponent, it's nearly impossible to deal with them. If you don't believe me and you think you can, please send me a video of you trying to fight while blindfolded completely. It's not the best, right? So what I mentioned previous, how clothing can be used to restrict the vision, and that's why you have to be very wary of what the other person is doing. And I had few instances where I was dealing with a person that was quite aggressive, and they actually used very effective technique. It wasn't eye poking, because to actually poke eye is very difficult. It was more like a face grabbing technique, where he, instead of punching, he would try to grab my face. So as I was moving, because of the 5 fingers, I caught one of the fingers in my eye, and it was bloodshot. I couldn't really see clearly. It impaired my vision. Although I got close to the person and I was quite effective with him, I would say if I wasn't successful with getting close to him, he would probably have an upper hand, because I really couldn't see from my eyes. At first, mainly the right eye. So that stuff works. But then again, if you're relying on stuff like this to defend yourself, you might get in trouble. Because if a person gets close to you and you do something like this to them, they get quite upset. You know, they can really do damage to you, whatever the intention was. Obviously, if it's life and death situation or rape or whatever, I would suggest try anything, you know, but yeah, it's effective to a certain extent. So one of the things that are neglected in martial arts is, at least traditional martial arts, is the physiological components of a person. And so height, it gives you so much advantage in certain positions. You get reach, you get extra distance you can cover, you get extra leverage, so it plays a big game. I mean, if you're dealing with a person that's tall, it's more difficult to. Obviously, that's for people that, you know, they'll consider stuff like this, or they think that it doesn't make a difference. It does. It does, clearly does. And weights as well, weight and mass. I mean, it helps with regards to force generation. It can slow you down, but in those split seconds that you have to react, the bigger, the taller guy, it's obviously going to be much more difficult to deal with. And therefore we have, I know it's sporting events, but we have, weight categories. And we can clearly see that the big individual presents more issues. And I mean, he can even be less technical, less skilled, but because of his size, he's able to overpower someone. And like I said, try taking down Shaquille O'Neal. It would be an issue if he really tried to hurt me. Although I had some experience in martial arts and self-defense in general, it would be a handful. Probably I would die. He would, he would be king of the world, like you said before. So speed is a massive factor, and not only it presents a massive problem for the person, it also decreases the response time, and also it increases the timing errors that you can make because of your speed. So you don't need to be as good in timing in general if you have a lot of speed and power as well. I think that's very overlooked, and it comes with height and size. Power matters. It's in self-defense. You might be able to take a punch from a small individual. For a bigger one that has a lot of power, generates a lot, even if it's short punch or a kick or whatever it is, with a lot of power, it's difficult. When it comes to power and speed and all the athletical abilities, one is the most overlooked is the ability to change direction of force. So we talked about this and we did some exercises in regards to that. To change the direction, to change the angles of your movement, while increasing the speed or keeping the speed the same, is actually a hard skill, and it's a very important skill to have, especially if you're trying to mitigate someone's attack, if you're trying to get someone's back, or if you're trying to control someone's movement. It's very important. So in general, ability to move is one of my high priorities. I think it's the basic of human being mechanics. I mean, you have to move, and when you did drills that people perceived as boxing drills, I just simply put it as movement drills. You move. You're aware of your situation. You're aware of your opponent, and you just try to effectively move. While keeping the stability, ability to move, and being in stable positioning, and attacking or defending, or resisting force, or just resting and being confident that you can change your force. Just actually apply a skill. Also, the other thing that I put in, it was physiological state, and that comes from my personal experience as well. It's a broad spectrum of states. It's injury, trauma, whatever. You feel like you can do stuff with your, let's say, right hand. When I was injured, I knew I couldn't apply any force from my right shoulder because it would just do more damage to myself than I would gain from doing that. Also, any kind of illness, if you consumed alcohol, if the other person has consumed alcohol, Alcohol significantly decreases some motor neural skills, motor cortex skills, so that can work in your favor if the person is quite drunk. It probably will be less coordinated. And also drugs play a massive factor. If someone's on amphetamines, if someone's on stimulants, it's very difficult to deal with them because they are wired to perform at the highest rate. So they become super active. They don't feel that much pain. It's very hard to do damage to them that they would feel. So even like knocking someone out, it becomes difficult because the brain is so active. The reaction time is better. Everything's, to be honest, better on stimulants. So that becomes difficult. And obviously steroids, if a person's on steroids, and we used to get a lot of some professional athletes, and they would be on all of those things. They would be on alcohol, that give them great confidence, they would give them stimulants, that they would feel no pain, nothing, and they'd be on loads of steroids, and it was a handful to deal with them. Not always successfully. Obviously, it takes some damage, and they would take some damage, but that's one of the things they have to consider: risk and reward. What you can do, or maybe you can rather, talk to them. If you can't, obviously, if it's just split second, then there's nothing you can actually do about it. But just take into consideration that, and especially if you're the person that's been drinking, right. That's very important. I call it liquid courage, and a lot of people think that they perform better with alcohol because they feel like they do, but it's not true. It's not true. You might thinking that you're fine, but you're not. But I've seen people that can't barely stand, and they still want to fight someone who's completely sober, and it's just almost comical, and they think they're fine. So the brain works in mysterious ways. That's when it comes to physiological states. I think I missed some things out, and I didn't get into detail much, but that's the things that I think your audience lacks knowledge at. They don't have enough information. Maybe they maybe naturally they think about stuff like this, but they didn't really break it down, and no one else break it down. So yeah, that's pretty much it.